She'll do her thing, and then when she's done, we'll have something to put our donations to our firefighters and first responders in.
I don't know where he got the notion of me acting anything out. I always stand perfectly still. The story I'm going to share with you tonight is how I got my driver's license. So, are you ready? I'm going to ring this bell, so I'll warn you so you don't get startled by it, although we do have a good crew on hand. Hear ye, oh ye, driver's education is coming to Lockeport Regional High School. The school was hopping with excitement. Everybody was talking about driver's ed. I signed up right away because I was sure it would be a breeze. After all, how hard could it be to drive a car? And what's the worst thing that could happen anyway? I would find out soon enough just how hard it was. But at least with driver's ed, I would learn to drive by the rules of the Department of Transportation and not by the rules of Eugene Roach. If I completed driver's ed successfully and got my certificate, Dad could get a 20%? No. A 15%? No. A 10%? No. He could get a measly 5% discount on his vehicle insurance. Now that was 1975, and vehicle insurance was probably $200 or $300. So the discount would have been $15 at the most. But $15 to Eugene Roach was $15. The program began in the fall, and Mr. S was the instructor. Before we could do any driving, we had to get our beginner's license, and we had to complete the in-classroom portion of theory. Boring! Mr. S, however, presented each lesson with cutting-edge technology. He not only had a chalkboard, he had an overhead projector. Young people don't know what either one of those are. Everything looked and sounded so easy. Next came the part we had all been waiting for, actual driving. We couldn't wait to get behind the wheel of that brand new car and squeal those tires, lay down the rubber. Well, you should know that Lockport's first driver's ed car was a brand new Pontiac Grand Prix or Grand Prix, whatever you say, and it was just a little bit smaller than that red fire engine. The hood itself stretched out the distance of at least 2 Honda Civics. It was a regular vehicle with one small exception. The car was equipped with a second brake on the instructor's side to use just in case of an emergency. Believe me, there was one occasion where I wished with all my heart Mr. S had used it. I'll tell you about it in a second. Anyway, after school, this is how it worked. 3 students piled into the back seat. Mr. S got in the passenger side, and the nervous driver got behind the wheel. And we were supposed to practice what we had learned on that chalkboard, and especially on those with that overhead projector. So once we had mastered the streets of Lockeport, we moved on to the streets of Shelburne, naturally. Oh dear, that created a giant problem for me. I had a big secret, and I didn't want anyone to know it. But I wasn't confident driving on the streets of Lockeport yet. The almost perfectly straight West Head Road was more my style. Isn't that pathetic? Well, anyway, one cold, wintry day, I was behind the wheel when we left Shelburne to return to Lockeport. In East Jordan, Mr. S said, "Now pull over, Melda, put the car in park, use the emergency brake, and let somebody else drive." Now, in my defense, the snow-covered white shoulder made it really hard for a nervous Nellie like me to tell where the shoulder ended and the ditch began. There are not enough words to tell you how much I wish Mr. S had put his foot on that second brake then. You can guess what happened. Yep, I pulled over just a hair too far, and the passenger side front tire slid down over the bank. Just enough that nobody could drive the vehicle out of the ditch. As you can imagine, I was feeling, well, I was mortified, embarrassed, disgraced, humiliated, ashamed, crushed, you name it. That's how I was feeling. I wanted to do a disappearing act. Actually, what I really wanted was one of those holes from the Bugs Bunny show, where I can just throw down my hole and jump into it. But of course, we know those only exist on the Bugs Bunny show. So I had to face the music. After what seemed like an eternity, a truck appeared. That was a really long time ago, but I think it was a Mr. Kane in East Jordan who came and rescued us. But by the time we got back to Lockeport, it was pitch dark. And nobody's parents were looking for them. Not like today. Poor me, I was drowning in self-pity. My 16-year-old brain was totally convinced that the principal, Mr. Stewart, would broadcast it to the whole school through the morning announcements. It would go something like this: "Could I please have your attention for this morning announcements?" That's my little granddaughter. Announcement number 1. The senior girls basketball team will leave at 2 p.m. sharp for their game against Barrington. Announcement number 2. The next dance will be this Friday night at 8 p.m. Teacher chaperones will be Miss Mooney and Mr. Oberlander. Do you remember either of them? Announcement number 3. The grade 11 class has won the prize for selling the most magazine subscriptions. And last but not least, Melda Roach from West Head put the driver's ed car in the ditch in East Jordan. I repeat, Melda Roach from West Head put the driver's ed car in the ditch in East Jordan. I had imagined that everyone would be pointing at me and going, snickering. But as it turned out, nobody else cared about my little boo-boo except Mr. S and me. You see, part of my problem was other people's parents took them out to drive for practice in between driver's ed lessons. Well, Dad was a busy fisherman, and Mom didn't drive. And to make matters even worse, Dad drove a 3-on-the-tree standard transmission. If I remember correctly, we went out driving twice. On the first trip, we were on our way home, and I was starting to climb up Morton Townsend's hill. And the old truck was going slower and slower and slower. After a while, Dad said, "Melda, you got to give her some gas if you're going to make it up the hill." Darn standard transmission. Why couldn't Dad drive an automatic just like everybody else's father? Oh, I know why. He didn't want to be like anybody else's father. The second time we went out, I got just a tiny little bit, just a hair too close to the guardrails on the back of the beach, and I smashed the side mirror. Oh no, a broken mirror. Did that mean 7 years of bad luck? Well, after weeks of driver's ed practice, it was time for the dreaded road test. I would rather drink poison. 40 years later, I still feel panicky when I hear road test. You see, I had a few good driving sessions, and that led Mr. S to believe that I could drive well. But you see, he was badly mistaken. I guess you could call it a false positive. I was positively not ready. What appeared to be skill was nothing more than mere coincidence. I was no more likely to pass a driving test than those Toronto Blue Jays are to win the World Series with that nitwit John Gibbons. Oh, I'm sorry if you like John Gibbons. The driver examiner, we've been trying to figure this out. We think it was a Mr. Harding or a Mr. Bowers. And we climbed into the fire engine. Oh no, it wasn't the fire engine. It was that Pontiac Grand Prix. And I'm not exaggerating one iota when I tell you I was a nervous wreck. I had all the telltale signs. My heart was racing, my face was blood red, every muscle in my body was tensed like this. My palms were sweaty, my head was spinning, my stomach was flip-flopping, I had cramps. I was just a hair away from hyperventilating. We would have needed the first responders to come and revive me, and then I think the test would have been canceled. But that, dear friends, was a sign of things to come. I bombed out big time. I made every mistake that had ever been made since driver's exams were introduced in Nova Scotia. And I even had a few of my own that nobody else had ever tried. Right off the bat, I entered the crosswalk between the post office and Balish's old store while a person was crossing. Worse still, I almost hit the person, and that person was Crystal Nickerson. I've never forgotten it. Now, I think that's supposed to be an automatic fail, because that's a major mistake. So why didn't the examiner tell me, that's the end of that, go back where we came from? Oh no, he insisted on dragging out the torture. Next, I made a right turn from Beach Street onto Crest Street by the bank, and I crept along, white-knuckled on the steering wheel till we got to the other end, where it joins onto South Street, right by Alice Robbins' house. Well, the driving examiner was writing furiously. Now I know that's not a good sign. He was not checking off all the things I was doing correctly, because there weren't any. Then we left Lockeport, drove across the causeway and up through Brighton to the old bridge road. That's where the driving examiner took everybody to demonstrate their backing up prowess. I will be forever grateful that we did not end up in Vinyl and Libby Williams's living room, or worse, at the bottom of the back harbor. That would have been the last straw. From there, it was time to return to Lockeport. But for some reason, Mr. Harding didn't ask me to parallel park. Actually, I can hardly imagine what. Oh no, I know why. He had already determined that I was public enemy number one to the residents of Lockeport, West Head, East Green Harbor, West Green Harbor, Allendale, Lydgate, Sable River, everywhere. And he didn't even ask me to make a three-point turn, which was a good thing because I was only good at making 10-point turns. I have no hard proof, but I believe he shortened the examination because he feared for his own life. And so I parked as he instructed, and he delivered his evaluation of my driving skills. The report was pitiful, dismal, abysmal, disastrous. These were just a few of his conclusions. I failed to give the right-of-way to a person already in the crosswalk. Number two, I don't see the significance of this. I stopped beside the stop sign instead of at the white line on the road. I came within a hair of sideswiping the telephone pole as I turned way too sharply from Crest Street onto South Street. The telephone pole is still there. Now, I disagree with him on this point. He said I didn't check my mirrors often enough. And that's because he thought I had to move my head in order to move my eyes. Well, that's simply not true. It's possible to do a mirror check without turning your head. But the next time, I turned my whole head. I didn't set the emergency brake when parking. Then he said I drove too slowly, especially when backing up on the old bridge road. He should have counted his lucky stars for that. But aside from those little boo-boos, I was textbook perfect. The examiner announced the verdict. I had made too many serious, almost fatal errors, and I almost passed. No, I just missed by 1 point. No, I soundly failed. There was no dispute. Now, if I hadn't been a nervous wreck, this is what I would have done. I would have looked him square in the eyes, and I would have quoted the words of that great hunter, Elmer Fudd. And I would have said, "You listen here, mister. I came here today for my driver's license, and I'm not leaving without it." After all, it could have been much worse. You know, I could have driven through the sun porch of the old Surf Lodge and taken out 3 residents. But I didn't. I could have run a stop sign and both of us could have been flattened by an 18-wheeler. But I didn't. I could have driven up on the sidewalk and landed square into Cheslang's store. But I didn't. And I could even have laid on the horn as I pulled out to pass a funeral procession. But I didn't. Thankfully, Lockeport had no stoplights, no one-way streets, and no roundabouts like that death trap they call the Armdale Rotary. The examiner suggested I retry the test after gaining more confidence and skill. Well, I had to go back to school and admit to Mr. S that I had failed. He was not impressed. I was the first student in the driver's ed class who failed. So a month later, the second attempt wasn't much better. Nerves just got the better of me. I will believe until my dying day that he stopped keeping score after I had made 4 serious mistakes, which was the maximum number permitted. And he did not ask me to parallel park, and he did not ask me to do a 3-point turn. At the end of the test, he reviewed my glaring mistakes, but gave me my license. I don't think he wanted to risk his life with me a 3rd time. But at least it only took me 2 tries. I read about a 42-year-old man, not a woman, but a man in England who got his license on the 37th attempt. Did I mention it was a man? And get a load of this. In Austria, you have to pass a psychological test before you're allowed to do the driving exam. What do you think of that? I bet you can think of 12 people right now who wouldn't be driving around if they had to pass that test. I might be one of them. Anyway, with my temporary license in hand, I was itching to drive Dad's 3 on the tree standard transmission truck. So what did I do? I coaxed, bribed, begged, something, my little brother Francis. Hey, wave your arms, Francis. The people want to know who you are. I hoodwinked him into going to town with me, you know, just to cruise around for fun and to show off a bit. Hey, look at me, I've got my driver's license, and you don't. Na, 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 na. And off we went. Well, you know what happens to show-offs. They get their just desserts. Everything was going hunky-dory until we reached the stop sign beside the old fire hall. No matter what I tried, I couldn't get that lousy truck going forward again. Francis and I in that truck, we jerked and lurched across the intersection until I gained enough speed that we could actually move. Now I know the problem. You probably have figured out already. I was trying to start out in third gear instead of first gear. It makes a big difference. Anyway, it's all water under the bridge now. That was eons ago. I'm a pro now. I love to drive stick. 3 on the tree, 4 on the floor, 5 on the side, 6 in a... I think I'll stop there. In fact, you don't know this little detail, but I am the Canadian female champion of the clutch. I love a red light at the pinnacle of a steep hill at rush hour with somebody tight on my bumper. Finding that right combination of clutch and gas, it's better than cocaine. It just gives me an adrenaline rush. And as well, Mr. Driving Examiner, I can drive on the 401 right through Toronto, one of North America's busiest highways, which at times is almost 20 lanes wide. And that's not all. I can drive in Montreal too, thank you very much. Well, for more than 40 years, I've been a menace on... For more than 40 years, I have been a model driver on the roads. I wanted to tell you that I have been boo-boo free, but that would just be the tiniest of white lies. 37 years ago, now that should be off my record by now, shouldn't it? 37 years ago, I struck a patch of black ice. My car went around and around and sat down in the ditch. Nothing was damaged. It didn't involve another vehicle. But for some reason, I felt I had to tell you that I did it. I almost forgot to tell you that now I can parallel park perfectly if what? I can parallel park perfectly if I am alone in the car. You see, what happens at our house is my husband Glenn says, "Hey kids, don't miss this. Your mother's got a parallel park." Well, how could you parallel park after that? Now, I know driving is a privilege, not a right, and a privilege can be withdrawn, but I am one super careful driver. Why? Because I am 100% positive that I could never ever pass another road test if I lived to be 100. Now, believe it or not, the driver's ed instructor, Mr. S, got the last laugh. It's common for graduating students to ask their friends and teachers to sign their yearbook. I asked Mr. S to sign mine, but what I didn't know was that he was still holding a grudge from when I put the car in the ditch and failed my test. He had never forgiven me. So this is what he wrote. Robert D. Sullivan. And in big fat letters, D for ditch. I don't think that's very professional of a teacher. And that, my dear friends, is the story of how I got my driver's license. I really hope that someone here can top my story, because I don't want to go down in history as Lockeport's worst driver. Thank you.